Ever had one of those moments, where you're like juggling a spilled coffee and a broken umbrella, and then someone stops you for a petition?
Oh, yeah.
And you still hear that voice inside saying, sign it. You should sign it.
Totally.
Or like picture yourself at a concert and you're trapped listening to some stranger go on and on about their vintage synthesizer collection.
Uh-huh.
But you just can't bring yourself to say, I need another drink, excuse me.
Yeah.
And honestly, who hasn't agreed to a second date just to be polite even when you're thinking, get me out of here?
Right.
Those little everyday traps, those moments when you feel obligated, that's what we're diving deep into today.
It's funny how common those experiences are, that feeling that you have to say yes, even when you really, really don't want to.
Exactly. It's like there's this invisible rule that we all have to follow. That's why we're talking about Hailey Magee's book, Stop People Pleasing, and Find Your Power. And if you think this is just another self-help book with the same old advice, you're wrong. Magee's book really gets into why we do this and how we can actually break free.
I think a lot of times the advice is really simple, like just be more assertive.
Right.
But Magee goes deeper. She looks at the real reasons why we act this way and gives some really practical advice for changing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really interested in.
So for everyone listening, our goal today is to answer this big question. How do you get rid of this habit of people-pleasing? How can you live a life that feels more real and more powerful? And to be clear, we're not saying you should become totally selfish.
Right.
It's about having healthier relationships and feeling better about yourself.
Which leads to another question. What does a healthy relationship even look like?
Yeah.
It's not about ignoring everyone or never helping, but changing why you do things and how they make you feel.
I totally agree. So we're going to look at a few important things that Magee talks about in her book. We'll start with where people-pleasing comes from. Then we'll talk about understanding and accepting your own feelings and needs. And that's something that people pleasers often struggle with.
Yeah.
Then we'll talk about setting boundaries, which can be hard, and what happens when you start changing your behavior. And finally, we'll look at how you can actually make your life better by giving, because you want to, not because you feel like you have to.
That sounds great.
Ready to get started?
Absolutely. I think we should start with the basics. Like, what exactly is people pleasing and where does it come from?
Okay, so Magee says it's important to understand that people-pleasing isn't like a mental illness. It's not a diagnosis.
Right.
It's more like a pattern of behavior, something that we do automatically without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And usually this starts early on in childhood.
That makes sense. When we're kids, our early experiences shape how we learn to connect with others and how we try to get approval.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that this people-pleasing shows up differently in different people.
Yeah.
Magee talks about these 4 portraits of people-pleasing.
Yeah.
She says you could be super assertive at work. No problem saying no.
Yeah.
But then in your romantic relationships, you can't express your own needs.
Interesting.
Or maybe you're fine speaking your mind with friends, but you freeze up around family.
Yeah.
It just shows that it's different for everyone.
I see what you mean. People-pleasing isn't just one thing. It's more complex than that.
Exactly. And we can't talk about these patterns without looking at gender roles. Magee talks about how societal expectations can really affect how men and women become people pleasers.
It's like society gives us these scripts based on our gender, and these scripts can actually encourage us to become people pleasers.
For women, there's still this big expectation that they should put everyone else's needs first.
Right.
Magee talks about this idea of emotional labor. It's the unseen work women do, like managing relationships, taking care of everyone's feelings, keeping the peace.
Yeah.
She also mentions that research shows women apologize more than men, even when they've done nothing wrong. And then there's this classic example of a woman being called bossy just for being confident.
Right.
When a man does the same thing, he's praised for it.
That's a good point. It's like women have to be careful. They have to be nice and agreeable or else they get punished.
Exactly. And for men, the pressure is different, but it can still lead to people-pleasing.
Oh, how so?
Men are expected to hide their feelings, to never show weakness,
Right.
to always push themselves to the limit.
Yeah.
Magee even mentions a study where lots of men said they felt pressured to be emotionally strong, to not show any weakness. They avoid talking about their feelings because they think it makes them look less manly.
So it's a different kind of people-pleasing.
Right.
They're trying to be the strong, silent type, even if they're struggling inside. It's like they're trying to fit into this idea of what a man should be.
And that idea of the unfeeling man ends up hurting everyone.
Yeah.
Now, Magee also talks about the Bowen family systems theory and this concept of differentiation. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have. Differentiation is basically about how well you can separate your own sense of self from other people.
Right.
People with high differentiation have a strong sense of who they are. They don't need constant approval from others.
Exactly. And people with low differentiation.
You're always trying to please others. They change what they think and do to get approval. They can't say no, and they have trouble sticking to their own opinions.
And that ties directly into people-pleasing.
Absolutely. If you don't have a strong sense of self, you're more likely to seek approval from others. You're more likely to put their needs first just to stay connected to them.
Exactly. Now, one thing Magee talks about early on is the difference between real kindness and people-pleasing. She uses this example of Hazel agreeing to help her friend Gwen move. Gwen gives her less than a day's notice.
Oh.
Hazel says yes because she feels like she has to. She doesn't want to feel guilty or lose Gwen as a friend, but while she's helping, she's stressed and resentful.
Yeah.
She's neglecting her own work.
That resentment is a big sign of people-pleasing. It tells you that you're not helping because you truly want to.
Magee breaks down real kindness into 3 things. First, there's goodwill. It means genuinely wanting to help someone because you care about them.
Okay.
Second, there's choice. You have the freedom to say yes or no, and you choose yes.
Got it.
And finally, there's abundance. You give because you have enough to share without draining yourself.
That makes sense. Real kindness is about choosing to help because you want to.
Right. With people-pleasing, there's this feeling that you have to. It comes from fear or pressure, and it leads to resentment.
Yeah.
And that resentment often comes from this idea that others should just know what we need, even if we don't tell them.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
Right. We think they should know I'm overwhelmed, or they should know this hurt my feelings, but they can't read our minds.
Exactly. We set ourselves up for disappointment.
So Magee says it's important to figure out your deepest why.
Your deepest why is like your main reason for wanting to change.
Exactly. It's the vision of the person you want to be, the kind of role model you want to be for others. Magee gives some great examples in the book. One woman wanted to be a strong example for her kids. She wanted them to learn how to stand up for themselves and have good relationships.
That's a great example.
Another woman talked about breaking this pattern in her family. The women in her family always put others first. They never said what they needed.
It's powerful when you think about it. Identifying your deepest why can really help you stick with it when things get tough.
So think about it. What is your deepest why? Write it down. Keep it somewhere you can see it. It'll remind you why you're doing this. Now, once you understand where this people-pleasing comes from, the next step is looking inward. You have to learn to recognize your own feelings.
And that can be really hard for people who are used to focusing on everyone else. It's like learning a new language.
Magee says that people-pleasers are often really good at sensing other people's emotions, but they're terrible at recognizing their own.
Yeah, it's like they've spent so long taking care of others that they've forgotten about themselves.
Right, and it's especially hard when that caretaker part of them kicks in.
And that usually starts in childhood.
Right.
The book talks about how kids whose safety depended on being aware of their parents' moods are more likely to develop this caretaker impulse. There's this psychologist, T.N. Dayton, who talks about how kids scan their parents' faces to figure out how they should feel.
It becomes a habit. They're always looking outward for cues instead of paying attention to what's going on inside.
Right.
So how do you start reconnecting with your own feelings? Magee gives some practical advice.
Okay, what's the first step?
Well, the first step is to notice when you're avoiding your feelings. Magee lists some common ways that people pleasers do this. Like they might overthink their emotions.
Yeah.
Or they might say their feelings aren't a big deal.
Yeah.
Or they might just distract themselves with something else.
It's easier to ignore them than to actually deal with them.
So just noticing those avoidance tactics and asking yourself, what am I afraid to feel right now? Can help you unlock those hidden emotions.
I like that.
Magee also talks about how important our bodies are in understanding our emotions.
The mind-body connection.
Exactly. This anthropologist, Roy Grinker, did some research and found that in many cultures, people experience emotional distress, mostly through physical sensations.
Interesting.
For example, anxiety might feel like a knot in your stomach. Sadness might feel like a weight on your chest. Frustration might feel like your jaw is clenched.
I can see that.
And these physical signs are universal. There was this study by some Finnish scientists that mapped bodily sensations associated with different emotions across cultures.
So no matter where you're from, your body is giving you clues about how you're feeling.
So Magee gives some techniques for understanding these bodily signals.
Like what?
Well, one is to work backward.
Okay.
So let's say you're feeling happy after hanging out with good friends. Notice what that happiness feels like in your body. Do you feel light, warm? There's this therapist, Hailey Magee, who suggests paying attention to specific sensations, like temperature changes, tightness or openness, movement or energy flow.
So you start to connect those physical feelings with specific emotions.
Right. The more you do this, the more you'll notice patterns. Maybe you always feel expansive in your chest when you're around supportive people.
Yeah.
Or maybe your shoulders always get tense before a stressful event.
That makes sense.
Now, the book tells this story about Rava, who wanted a glass of wine after a tough talk with her mom.
Oh, I've been there.
But instead of just giving in to the urge, she stopped and paid attention to how she was feeling. She noticed the anger in her chest, and then that anger slowly turned into sadness and tiredness.
So she just let herself feel it.
Right. She didn't try to push it away or distract herself. And then there's learning to soothe yourself physically.
Like taking deep breaths.
Exactly. Things like putting your hand on your heart, taking deep breaths, or doing some gentle movement can really help. In Rava's case, she decided to go for a run.
So she found a healthy way to release that emotional energy.
The book also talks about Audrey, who sets alarms throughout the day to remind herself to check in with her emotions.
Oh, that's interesting.
At first, it felt a little weird, but over time, she got better at noticing how she was feeling. And then she started to think about what those feelings were telling her about her needs. It's a good way to practice becoming more aware of your emotions.
I like that. It's like building a muscle.
Then there's Lars. He went through a divorce. And during a family gathering, he decided to go to his old bedroom.
Oh, wow.
He wanted some quiet time to feel the sadness he'd been holding back. It was his way of taking care of himself, of allowing himself to feel those tough emotions.
That's a powerful example.
So once you learn to recognize your feelings, the next step is honoring them. And that brings us to honoring your needs.
And this is where people pleasers really struggle.
Right.
They think it's selfish to put their own needs first.
That's such a common belief. But Magee challenges that. She even presents research showing that putting yourself first can actually make your relationships better.
Really?
It makes sense, though. If you're always running on empty, taking care of everyone else, how can you truly be there for them?
I see what you mean.
But when you take care of your own needs, you have more to give.
It's like filling up your own cup so you can pour from it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's this guy, Amit, in the book. He spent months taking care of his sick mother. And when he finally got home, he realized how cold, hungry, and tired he was.
Oh, wow.
He was so focused on his mom that he forgot about himself.
That's easy to do.
And Magee says that those uncomfortable emotions we talked about, they can actually tell us what we need. Like if you feel anxious, maybe you need more security. If you feel depressed, maybe you need more connection.
Okay.
And if you feel resentful, maybe you're giving too much in a relationship.
Makes sense.
But people pleasers have these ways of ignoring their needs.
Right.
Like they compare their problems to others and think, well, at least my situation isn't as bad.
Right.
Or they think, no one's going to meet my needs anyway, so why bother asking?
I've definitely thought that before.
Or they just tell themselves that taking care of their needs is too much work.
So what's the solution?
Magee says it over and over again in the book. You're allowed to have needs.
That sounds simple, but it's probably really hard for people pleasers to accept.
It is. The book tells this story about Maya, who finally told her friend Tessa that she needed a quieter place to hang out.
And how did Tessa react?
She was totally understanding.
Wow, that's great.
And to help us stay grounded in our needs, Magee talks about identifying our values.
Values are like our guiding principles. They tell us what's truly important to us.
Things like authenticity, compassion, courage, independence. These are like the points on a compass that guide our lives. And when you know your values, you can use them to make decisions that are good for you, especially as you're trying to stop people-pleasing.
That gives you a clearer sense of direction.
Exactly. Magee has this exercise called 2 values wheels to help you make tough decisions.
Oh, tell me about that.
So you draw 2 circles and write down your core values inside. Then you think about a difficult decision you have to make. Like in the book, there's this woman, Danae, who has to decide whether or not to go to a family reunion.
Okay, a tough one.
She's not sure if she wants to go because there's someone there who's always difficult. So she uses the values wheels to see which choice aligns better with her values.
I see. So it helps you visualize what's most important to you.
Magee also has other exercises for figuring out your values, like reviewing your aspirational values every day, or even rewriting a memory to make it align with your values.
It's about making your values a part of your everyday life, not just something you think about once in a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you know your values and you're starting to honor your needs, the next step is updating how you see yourself.
You mean our self-concept.
Right. Our self-concept is the set of beliefs we have about who we are.
Like if you think you're a shy person, you're going to act like a shy person.
Exactly. So to break the cycle of people-pleasing, you have to change how you see yourself. You have to let go of those old labels like the caretaker or the nice guy.
Okay.
And you have to start embracing new ones like authentic, self-respecting, or assertive.
It's not just about changing your actions. It's about changing how you see yourself.
Exactly. And when you start acting in ways that match this new self-image, it becomes easier to keep those good habits going. It's a positive cycle.
I like that.
Magee has this 5-step process for updating your self-concept. She uses this woman named Chelsea as an example. Chelsea was a big people pleaser, but she wanted to change.
Good for her.
The first step is to look for evidence of change. To notice those times, even small ones, when you acted in a way that was more assertive or put yourself first.
Yeah, okay.
Then you have to identify the negative stories you tell yourself, those thoughts that hold you back.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy.
Those can be so hard to get rid of.
Then you have to come up with new, more positive stories about yourself.
Okay.
And then find real evidence from your own life to support those new stories. And the final step is to actually live as if these new stories are true. You don't have to wait until you feel completely confident or transformed.
That's a good point.
Just start taking those small actions, even if you feel a little hesitant. Chelsea, in the book, started keeping a note on her phone where she wrote down every time she was assertive.
That's a great idea.
And over time, it really changed how she saw herself.
It's like building a case for your new self.
Exactly. And as you get better at honoring your needs and updating your self-concept, you'll probably start to rediscover your own wants.
The things you desire for yourself.
Right. And those wants might have been buried for a long time.
Especially for people pleasers. They're so used to thinking about what other people want.
Magee has some cool exercises for uncovering those hidden wants.
Like what?
There's the wand exercise, where you imagine a world where all your wishes come true.
Sounds fun.
Then there's the lottery exercise, where you imagine winning $10 million and spending it all on yourself.
Okay, I like that one.
And then there's a more reflective exercise, where you think back to things you enjoyed in the past, things that made you happy.
So you start to reconnect with those things that bring you joy.
Exactly. In the book, Sarah rediscovers her love for adventure and new experiences through these exercises.
That's great.
And Magee breaks down wants into different categories, like material, interpersonal, temporal, physical, emotional, aesthetic, spiritual, and purpose-driven wants. She encourages you to pick a category you struggle with.
Okay.
And then try to come up with 3 small wants in that category.
Yep.
And then try to fulfill at least one of them. Magee even shares her own experience of struggling with material wants. She had to learn to recognize and accept her own desires.
So it's about starting small. It doesn't have to be some big dramatic change.
Exactly. And as you get more in tune with your feelings, your needs, and your wants, you'll start to notice your relational needs.
Our needs within our relationships.
Right. And this is a good sign. It means you're realizing when a relationship isn't giving you what you deserve.
It's like you're waking up to what you truly deserve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Magee talks about need signposts. These are feelings and behaviors that signal an unmet need in a relationship.
Like what?
Things like feeling resentful all the time.
Yeah.
Or feeling drained after spending time with someone.
Hmm.
And it's important to learn the difference between your personal needs and your relational needs.
So the needs you have within yourself versus the needs you have in connection with others.
Right. And Magee knows that people are often afraid to express their relational needs. They're scared of seeming needy or demanding.
Yeah, I get that.
So she has this thought experiment.
Oh, tell me about it.
Imagine a world where everyone's excited to meet your needs, where people are happy to help.
That's a nice thought.
She uses this example of Bethany, who realized she needed her partner to contribute more financially.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Bethany had to overcome her own doubts to finally speak up.
Good for her.
So we've talked about our feelings, our needs, and our wants. Now, how do we protect all of that? That's where boundaries come in.
Especially internal boundaries.
Right. Internal boundaries are the promises you make to yourself. They're about how you're going to behave, how you're going to spend your time and your energy.
And these boundaries are so important for building trust in yourself.
Exactly. If you keep breaking promises to yourself, you start to doubt your own ability to follow through. Like if you keep overcommitting your time or neglecting your own well-being.
And it's easy to blame others when they're actually just taking advantage of our lack of boundaries.
The book gives this example of Jill, who sets a boundary about not overbooking her schedule. And then there's Foster and Emily, who are trying to set boundaries with their adult son, Jeremy, about financial support.
It's about taking responsibility for our own limits, deciding what we're willing to do and what we're not.
Right. And Magee gives some helpful questions to figure out where you need stronger boundaries. She talks about time, emotional capacity, and honesty. And once you have those internal boundaries in place, you'll probably need to start making requests of the people in your life.
Which is something people pleasers hate to do.
I know. They think people should just know what they need.
It's so frustrating when that happens.
Magee says that actually telling people what you need is the best way for them to support you.
It gives them the chance to actually understand what you're going through.
Exactly. There's this couple in the book, Devlin and JD. They moved in together and started having communication problems.
What happened?
Well, they had different needs.
Yeah.
And they weren't talking about them. They just expected each other to know.
Oh, I see.
So Magee gives this framework for making clear requests. It goes like this. I feel when you into. Because I need. Would you mind?
That's a good format.
It lets you express yourself without blaming the other person.
Yeah.
And for tougher situations, she talks about radical transparency.
Where you're totally open and honest.
Right. Devlin used the I feel when you approach with JD about needing some quiet time after work.
And how did it go?
It really improved their communication.
Good.
And Magee talks about the different ways people might react to your requests.
Like what?
They might agree, might resist,
Oh.
or you might need to negotiate.
Right.
But even a negative response tells you something about the relationship.
Okay.
So we've talked about internal boundaries and making requests. Now let's talk about setting boundaries with others. This is the hard part.
The rubber meets the road.
Magee says boundaries are separations we create to protect ourselves. They're like shields that keep out things that hurt us, like rudeness, unwanted obligations, or disrespect.
Makes sense.
And she talks about different ways to set these boundaries. One is clear and direct communication. You just say what your limit is. Like in the book, Naomi tells Ken she's not okay with his sexist jokes.
Good for her.
Then there's radical transparency, where you're completely open and honest. Naomi uses that approach with her sister, Aria.
Okay.
And then there's simply speaking up for what you believe in. But the important part is actually enacting those boundaries. You can't just say them, you have to follow through.
Right.
If you say you're not going to gossip anymore, you have to actually walk away when people start gossiping.
Your actions have to match your words.
Magee also makes a distinction between disengaging to avoid conflict and disengaging to set a boundary.
That's an important difference.
When you disengage to people pleasers, you're acting out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of disappointing someone, fear of not being liked.
Yeah.
But when you disengage to set a boundary, it's because you're taking control. You're saying, I can't control what you do, but I can control whether or not I participate.
It's powerful.
And sometimes you need to make bigger changes in your relationships.
Like what?
You might need to see someone less often. You might need to talk to them differently. And in some cases, you might need to end the relationship entirely.
That's a tough one.
It is. But Magee says that healthy relationships are based on respect. And setting boundaries shows that you respect yourself.
And it builds trust in yourself.
Now let's talk about emotional boundaries.
The boundaries we set around our feelings.
Exactly. These boundaries help us separate our emotions from the emotions of others.
Because it's so easy to get swept up in other people's feelings.
Especially for people pleasers.
Right. They often have weak emotional boundaries because they learned early on to manage other people's emotions.
Magee talks about Lindsay Gibson's idea of emotional parents. These are kids who basically become the emotional support for their own parents.
Wow.
And as adults, these people often struggle to separate their own feelings from the feelings of others.
So how do we set healthy emotional boundaries?
Magee says we have to remember that we're each responsible for our own emotions.
It's not our job to fix everyone else's feelings.
Exactly. We can be compassionate without taking on their emotional burden.
Okay.
She gives this 4-step process.
Tell me about it.
First, you recognize when you're feeling the urge to take responsibility for someone else's emotions.
Okay.
Then you create emotional distance. Magee calls it an emotional boundary bubble.
I like that.
Then you change your actions to match this boundary. And finally, you remember the long-term benefits.
So it's about protecting your own emotional space.
Exactly. There's this woman, Margot, in the book. She had plans with friends, but her boyfriend was disappointed that she couldn't see him. And she immediately felt the urge to change her plans.
To make him happy.
Right, but she caught herself. She recognized that urge to take responsibility for his feelings. And then there's Helga, who has to deal with her grumpy dad at family dinners. She sets an external boundary by limiting her time with him.
So sometimes you have to take action to protect yourself.
Right. And Magee says that sometimes you can use either an internal or external boundary to deal with the same situation.
It depends on what works best for you.
There's this woman, Amy, who uses her boundary bubble to deal with her mom's complaining. She stays emotionally detached, but she still listens and gently redirects the conversation.
That's a good strategy.
And when we resist taking on other people's emotions, it can actually be good for them too.
How so?
It helps them learn to manage their own feelings. It helps them become more independent.
Okay.
In the book, Jared tries to fix William's emotional distance. But Magee says it's healthier to just accept William as he is.
So sometimes the best thing we can do is let people be responsible for their own emotions.
Right. Now, as we talk about setting boundaries, we have to remember that it's not always easy or safe for everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
For people who are marginalized or oppressed, setting boundaries can be risky.
Like if you're a person of color speaking up against racism can have serious consequences.
Exactly. Magee gives examples of how things like financial problems or abusive relationships can make it hard to set boundaries. She also talks about how sexism can be used to silence women, and how women, especially women of color, LGBTQ plus women, and women with disabilities, often face more challenges in the workplace when they try to assert themselves.
It's not fair, but it's the reality for a lot of people.
Magee also talks about masking for neurodivergent individuals. It's when they hide their true selves to fit in.
It must be exhausting to do that all the time.
It is. She also discusses the challenges faced by people from collectivist cultures who are navigating individualistic societies.
Where the focus is on the individual rather than the group.
Right. And Magee says that real change starts with awareness. We have to recognize how we might be contributing to these systems of oppression.
Even if we're not doing it intentionally.
And she acknowledges that sometimes safety has to come first. Setting boundaries might not always be possible or safe.
Especially in dangerous situations.
But she also gives examples of things we can do to fight oppression in our communities, in our workplaces, in our political systems. It's a reminder that this work is bigger than just ourselves.
It's about creating a more just and equitable world.
Now, as you start setting boundaries and changing your people-pleasing habits, you're going to feel some uncomfortable emotions.
Like what?
Fear, guilt, anger. It's like growing pains.
It's part of the process.
Magee talks about radical acceptance as a way to deal with these emotions.
What is radical acceptance?
It's about recognizing and acknowledging what you're feeling right now, without judgment, with kindness. Tara Brach defines it as meeting your experience with an open and kind heart.
So it's about accepting what is.
Exactly. And the first step is simply noticing and naming the feeling. Then you connect with how it feels in your body.
Okay.
And then you offer yourself compassion. You don't criticize yourself for feeling that way.
That sounds hard.
It can be, especially when it comes to guilt. People pleasers often feel guilty when they start putting themselves first.
Because they're so used to putting everyone else first.
Right. But Magee says this guilt can actually be a good sign. It means you're starting.